So this week we're going to be covering digital media, and I feel that this is, out of all the modules that we've done so far, and probably for this entire class, this is the one that we're all the most familiar with. We know what digital media is. In short, it is, audio, video, images, and interactive things that take advantage of all this. This week, we're going to get into detail about just what digital media is in a more specific way. We're going to look at how it's used, how to create it, how to edit it, and other such things related. So let's dive straight in. This is probably going to be a shorter lecture than what we've had for the last couple of weeks, just because a lot of this is repeated from previous weeks, so I don't want to use up too much of your time or mine by repeating myself. So to begin, we're going to start with the definition of digital graphics, and in short, this is just images. They can exist in one of two major forms, either bitmap or raster, or vector graphics. And if you'll recall from a previous lecture, bitmapped graphics use pixels in a X by Y grid to represent an image, whereas vector graphics use mathematical calculations to draw the lines. And while they are much higher detail, they are harder to work with. Some properties of digital graphics that affect their quality. Number one is resolution. If you recall, that is the X by Y pixel count. And also compression. There are two forms of compression, lossy or lossless, and they're exactly what they sound like. With lossy compression, some quality is lost. It's not a one-to-one transition from the uncompressed image to its compressed file. Whereas lossless, it is a one-to-one. And generally, lossless compression produces larger files. Something that this lecture doesn't talk about, but I want to cover here, just as a little bonus for you guys, is color depth. This is something that varies from one type of compression to another. It is mentioned in a table later, but it doesn't really give you much information about it. And what color depth refers to is the range of colors available for a particular image. Some formats like GIFs only support 256 colors. It's a very limited palette, whereas PNGs and more high quality image formats will support massive ranges, millions upon millions of colors. And these are the ones that your digital artists tend to work with, PNGs and JPEGs. Looking at audio, we have, or really any kind of media, you have analog and digital. And analog is exactly what you're used to. If you look at old TVs or old radios, this handles physical signals. So you have your AM radio waves, FM radio, light signals, and such things like that. Whereas digital reads and produces information as a string of binary digits. We've already covered binary in a previous lesson, so I'm not going to repeat myself on that. And the process of going from analog to digital is predictably digitizing. A specific example of digitizing is sampling, and that is the process for audio data. You take an audio input of some kind, whether that be a voice or a sound clip or some background noise, and you sample it and make it into digital data. And here it talks about bit rate being one of the factors that affects quality. And this is the amount of data that is encoded within a particular period of time. It is typically measured in kilobytes per second. Whenever I record something using Audacity or OBS or whatever sort of recording software I'm using at the time, I tend to shoot for 96 to 128 kilobytes per second. Depending on your uses, you may need more, you may need less. Something else that this doesn't talk about is sample rate. And all sample rate is how fast you are taking samples, what sort of time interval there is, and this is measured in hertz, similar to sound waves. So TV and radio and things of that nature generally range from 44.1 to 48 kilohertz. Some things go much higher, some things go much lower. Usually you're not going to hear anything with a sample rate lower than 8 kilohertz. But for those who need just a quick refresher of what that means, kilohertz in our case is 44.1 to 48,000 samples per second in general for TV, film, radio, and so forth. And for the next few slides, we're going to look at some examples of digital media file formats. We're going to begin here by looking at images. I've already mentioned GIFs, JPEGs, and PNGs. You also have TIFF files, and these are much less compressed files. They are larger, higher quality, and those make up your bitmapped graphics. As for vector graphics, you have SVG and EPS, and I'll let you guys read up on those on your own time. I don't want to spend too much time getting into the nuts and bolts of file formats. Looking at some audio formats now, if you are a Mac user, you have probably seen files in AAC or M4P, and that's just preferred file formats for iTunes. We also have AIFF and MP3, MP3 being a standard for music and ebooks. If you've ever downloaded something from Kindle or Amazon Music, or really most places in general, or ripped music off of a CD, you'll notice that they have come in MP3 format. And that's just because it is the standard. It has a great balance of quality and file size. You get a really good quality sound without it taking up 1 million megabytes for one CD. WAVE, which is either with or without an E. This is an uncompressed audio format, generally very high quality, but huge file size. Good for sound bites and some quick voice clips, though I tend to use an alternative to WAVE that is a lossless and compressed format. It's not mentioned here, called Ogvorbis. It is usually anywhere from 1/6 to 1/10 the file size, and I do not notice a difference. I don't notice any loss in quality between WAVE and OGG. Sometimes I even get the feeling that OGG files sound better. So in general, I personally don't recommend you use WAVE files for recording. Most things that support WAVE also support OGG. Use OGG. And lastly, WMA. This is just a compressed, lossless file format. It's a proprietary format used by Windows Media Player. Here we have a few video codecs, and what a codec is used for is simply for compressing and encoding video data and generating its output file. DivX has been around for quite a while. I've seen it in plenty of places, but I've never used it myself. It is for AVI video files, And AVI is very high quality at the cost of taking up an enormous amount of memory. What I tend to prefer is MP4, and for that I use H.264. I've not yet updated to H.265 because the last time I tried it, it didn't work. I lost all my audio. I don't know what I did wrong, but for the meantime, I stick to 264. And MP4, like MP3, its an audio counterpart, is a great balance between quality and file size. It's good for personal recordings. You know, if you are a YouTuber, you post videos there or anywhere just for your own personal use or as a job, you might prefer MP4 if you don't want to invest in high capacity storage devices. MPEG-2 and MPEG-4 are more general purpose, multi-format codecs. They give you a few options, as you can see here. However, I personally don't use them. I'm not a fan of their outputs. I stick to H.264, like I said. And here we just have a reiteration of some information about the audio formats. Like I said, AVI, MP4, common uses across the board. QuickTime.mov files, those are preferred by Apple software. And WMVs are the audio counterpart to WMA. These are, again, a proprietary format for Windows Media Player. A quick note about video resolution. There is a huge range of available resolutions, much like there are a lot of options for resolution on a monitor or TV. And so we're just going to go over a few common examples of them. First is standard definition, which you'll find in 640 by 360, 720 by 480. I've also seen 853 by 480 as a more strange one. And these are, you know, low detail, similar resolution to what you would see from TV shows like 15 years ago. But nowadays, most of us use one of the two standards for high definition, those being 1280 by 720 and 1920 by 1080. And these provide a good balance, again, between quality and file size. They're a good in-betweener. A lot of TV nowadays is recorded in one of these two. For a long time, I don't know if this is still the case because I haven't had a TV of my own in 9 years. But last time I was, you know, sat in front of a TV, there were HD channels specifically for people who use HD TVs. I don't know if that's still a thing. It may just be that HD is the standard now and everyone just records in HD and there's only that on those specific channels. But for those who really want to push the quality to the max, we have Ultra HD. Those come in 3840 by 2160 or 4K, and 7840 by 4320 or 8K. And the reason why we call them 4K and 8K, it may not be completely obvious at first glance, but if you were to round the horizontal resolution for these, you would get 4,000 and 8,000 respectively. And that's really it. That's why we call them 4K and 8K. And as I said before, full HD is good quality, but isn't impossible to handle on most internet connections, excuse me. Animation, we've all seen 2D and 3D animation in our lives, but really quickly we want to explain exactly what is the difference under the hood. So with 2D animation, you're going to have flat images usually outlined in some way, drawn onto a background, and these are going to be played in rapid succession to give the illusion of motion, along with sound effects and other such things. On the other hand, 3D models, 3D animation, relies on, like I said, models that can be rotated along any axis, X, Y, or Z. It can be manipulated. You may have heard people talk about the poly count or polygon count of a model. And in general, the higher the poly count of a model, the more detailed the animations can be. And the main way that we handle animations is through keyframes. So say you have a character model that is waving its arm from left to right. Well, instead of having a pose for every single point where it could be on that animation, you would instead have a handful of what we call keyframes. And these are specific poses that give animators the means to smooth out the appearance of it. So instead of having maybe 60 frames of animation for a simple motion like waving an arm, you would use what's called model interpolation for the software to figure out how we get from keyframe to keyframe. And obviously more keyframes equals a nicer transition, but you want to find the middle ground where you're not wasting time making a whole bunch of keyframes to the point you might as well not even use them. Anything else on this slide that we need to cover? Does not appear so. All right, so that's the first chunk of this lecture done. Does anybody have any questions while I get a sip of water?
No, we're good.
Excellent. So next we're going to look at using our many available sources of digital media. And so we look at gaming systems. We've talked about these plenty. You've got virtual reality, mixed reality, holograms, motion sensing game consoles. You've had the Wii, the Switch. These are things we're all very familiar with. Even your phone does some degree of motion sensing for games. So this is so ubiquitous that I don't want to spend too much time talking about it. On the other hand, I will take a second to talk about augmented reality. We have mentioned this before, but it was mobile devices that really popularized the use of augmented reality, especially through games like Pokemon Go. And just as a quick refresher, this takes a real world image through your phone's camera and superimposes images onto it. So you can see here in the figure, you've got an image of someone walking along what looks like a forest trail or something like that. And they're playing Pokemon Go. And so there is a Pokemon superimposed into the center of the screen. Moving on from that, we have simulations. These are animations or interactive media of some kind. It could be something like a game that is used for teaching and training. We use these all the time in industry, military, and as you might expect, it's a nice way to train employees or recruits or whatever without having to use valuable resources other than, electricity and development time. And maybe a significant amount of space depending on what they're being trained to do. Like if they're a pilot, those simulators might be quite large to represent a full-sized cockpit. PowerPoint is a very simple example. It uses transitions for animations, or I said that backwards. It uses very simple animations for its transitions. And lastly, animation on the web. We have the GIF file. You might have seen any number of memes that are animated and have text popping up over them to sell the joke. And those are generally stored as GIFs. Very simple format to work with for quick animations. For bigger animations, we have things like Flash. This is a deprecated or no longer in use browser plugin. It has been effectively replaced by HTML5, the latest version of HTML. And this can be used to, instead of drawing out the frame for every point in an animation, you have a bunch of shapes on screen and you can manipulate them in different ways. And this makes animation much easier. And you may have seen some cartoons or whatever where it's been used as a form of laziness. I've seen some pretty terrible animations that just use the minimum amount of Flash work to animate things and that's it. But it's supposed to be there as a tool to make animation easier, and so you can do far more advanced things, not as a crutch to do less work. And we use digital graphics for any number of things, such as adding dramatic effect or informative photos. We also use logos for businesses to enhance brand recognition. And for our own personal use, we can resort to online stock photo galleries. These contain images that we can use in presentations or documents, either for free or at a small cost. And finally, browsers give us the option of a license filter, where we can search up images that might be under a Creative Commons license or something like that, so we can use them without having to worry about violating copyright or trademark laws. We use digital media in industry beyond simulations. We also use them to make designing products and machinery easier. We mentioned this in, I believe it was week 1's lecture. I'm not entirely sure, but one of our first lectures, we talked about how machines are used in industry to assist in the design of products through computer-aided design, or CAD software. This exists in both 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional formats. There are programs like AutoCAD and CAMCAD that have been around for ages. I heard about them as far back as the early 2000s, when I was still, in the 4th and 5th grade. And as far as I know, those specific programs, at least one of them, are still in use. But to assist with that and make design even easier, we have employed the use of artificial intelligence, namely machine learning, which is a branch of AI that allows machines to pick up on patterns and learn from these patterns and other information to make progressively better decisions. And for those of you who are interested, for the computer science majors in the class who might want to look deeper into machine learning, I've mentioned FreeCodeCamp many times. They have an entire certification track on machine learning using Python. So go ahead and give that a look if you're interested. Next thing to bring up is video streaming. This is something we've all done. You're currently doing it right now. This is a live video stream that you're watching. You might also see live streams on Twitch or YouTube. also on-demand videos on both websites and others such as Netflix or Hulu. I don't need to go into very much detail on these. You all know about this by now. All right, going from how we use them to how we make them. This is the last of the sections for today. And before we dive into it, does anybody have any questions?
Well, good.
Outstanding. So let's dive right in. This was an area of interest for me, especially in undergrad as just a hobby. And even now I do a bit of it myself, as you can probably gather. So let's not waste any time and go straight into it. Hardware devices for graphics and animations. Obviously, for taking pictures, you might use a digital camera or your smartphone. Your smartphone has some advantages of its own. Number one, we have some seriously high resolution cameras built into our phones nowadays. I remember when cell phones were first becoming a thing, like that everybody had in the mid to late 2000s, it was a huge deal to get like an 8 megapixel camera. Nowadays, that's quaint. I know people who have trouble posting, like sharing photos to Discord or other chat apps because their phone defaults to 8K images, which is ridiculous. But also, we have geotagging, which is a little more than just adding some geographical information behind the scenes in a photo using your phone's location. You might use a graphics tablet. If you know any artists, they might have a Wacom tablet. And this usually comes with a pressure-sensitive pen used for, well, drawing. Instead of having to burn through tons and tons of paper, you can just, practice your drawing skills on a Wacom. And finally, scanners. You could think of these as the opposite of a printer. These usually accompany a printer, especially larger ones used in offices. And these take printed material and digitize them, turn them into images or PDF files. You've all, at some point, I imagine by now, seen a PDF file. And this is a sort of, excuse me for a second. This is an image file of sorts. Sometimes it has readable text. Well, selectable text, rather. I should be more specific. But yeah, it stands for portable document file, and it's the common use for storing papers or forms or what have you. But like I said, you can also scan documents and just save them as images if you so please. As far as editing is concerned, we have a few options. A lot of these first three can be interchangeable depending on how you use them. You have your image editors, photo editors, and drawing programs. Something like Photoshop might be better suited to photo editing, whereas Paint.net, my preferred art tool, is more of a drawing and image editing program. But there's a lot of overlap between image editors. And I don't really need to go too much into animation software. It is really just, it is exactly what it says on the box. It lets you put together images and create your 2D animations. Recording and playing sounds and music. The process for recording, you're going to need some kind of editor software, recording software. First off, you need an input device. It can be a microphone, it can be a headset, or if you have the right audio drivers and the right programs, I have done this many times. Pardon me? I've done this many times where I've had my speakers serve as an input device. So a sound is played, and the recording software picks that up and says, okay, I need to sample this. As for sound recording software, and also software that can digitize and capture the sound, from my experience, these tend to be one and the same nowadays. There may be some that are different, but I use Audacity. I've also used other programs like Acid Music Studio, and these tend to do both. They tend to handle capture and editing and everything. Just it's an all-in-one workstation. And Audacity is free on top of that. So if you want to try sound editing, I would recommend starting there. As far as playing sounds, you need a sound card, firstly. And this is your computer's hardware solution. Pardon me, let me start that over. You need a sound card, which is a line of communication within your hardware between the CPU/RAM and also your audio software. It's what your computer uses to properly read audio data. You need speakers, obviously. Your audio software, it could be Windows Media Player, it could be Winamp. You need something that knows how to read audio data on the front end and play it through your speakers. And some audio files are going to require their own specialized players, such as synthesized music. Synthesizers are used everywhere in music nowadays. I don't think there's a single genre that doesn't rely on synthesized audio in some way. At least not in mainstream music. And I can't exactly blame anyone for that because they're an incredibly handy tool. They capture digital audio from the word go. There's no analog alternative. You're not handling a guitar and then turning that into digital audio. But that's a bit of an unnecessary example in sound recording. Usually you would want to have an instrument that common, but for less common instruments or for sounds that can't be made by a musical instrument, synthesizers can serve a very useful purpose. A lot of synthesized sound comes in the form of a MIDI file, MIDI standing for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. And MIDI files themselves do not necessarily contain audio data in a strict sense. Rather, MIDI files reference what is called a sound font, either an SFZ or an SF2 file. And these sound fonts, think of them as a table of instrument sounds. And so a MIDI file will reference these sounds in a sequence, tell them to apply a certain pitch or some other effect. And that is what produces your sound, is the MIDI and the sound font working together to communicate. And we've talked about speech and voice recognition in previous lectures, but we've done that separately, and it's important to make the distinction. So speech recognition picks up on the words that are spoken and uses that for commands or for dictation, which is speaking to write some kind of text. Digital assistants combine AI with speech recognition to carry out commands and make our lives easier. However, voice recognition, rather than picking up on the words, picks up on the voice itself, determines who it is that's speaking, and is better suited to security protocols rather than digital assistants. Talking very briefly about synthesized speech. Text-to-speech is a common tool. You may find it in various instant messaging apps, and it is the backbone of screen readers. And all it does is it takes some form of input, whether it be written text or the alt text of an image, and it converts it to a synthesized voice, which will then speak that data to a user. And naturally, having impaired vision, like I've said before in previous lectures, that I have at times relied on screen readers and text-to-speech. It's a handy tool, not just for someone with vision problems, but in general, if you are trying to skim through some information, it might be best to, instead of straining your eyes trying to read it, especially if you might have a headache or something like that, you could instead use text-to-speech to ease the strain. Moving on to capturing video, we have a few options for video devices. For capture, you have your digital video cameras, camcorders, and obviously your smartphones. Just like with images, you can capture some really high quality videos. I actually think my phone captures better video than the webcam that's currently sat above my head. Speaking of webcams, these differ from the other options in that they don't store video feeds on themselves, rather they go straight to a computer. And a note, I've said this earlier with AVI files, but in general, video files tend to be very large, ranging anywhere from 1 to 30 gigs for a single hour of video. Back in the days when I regularly posted videos to YouTube, I was well aware of how crazy file sizes could get. Even using something highly compressed like MP4, a half hour of video footage would take up 2 to 3 gigabytes. For playing video, obviously you need a computer with a video card, and a video card is exactly what a sound card is, but obviously for video. You need media player software. It could be Windows Media Player. Again, it does audio and it also does video. And lastly, and it also just reiterates, I don't know why, that file sizes are huge. Accessing video on the web. Thanks to faster internet speeds, we don't have to wait for videos to buffer quite as bad as we used to. YouTube has been able to increase its playback options. I remember a long time ago when I first discovered YouTube, it didn't even allow for high definition video or 60 frame per second video. It was 480p, and that's about it. 30 FPS if you're lucky. Nowadays, we can handle high definition video on most broadband connections. And lastly, mentioning video conferencing is something we've all done. We're all doing for classes now, though typically video conferencing, as we've recognized it, everybody is talking at once, and their webcams might be visible at the same time. But like I said, we're all very familiar with this. And one last note to talk about is editing digital media. You have many options. We've already covered options for image editing. For audio editing, like I said, I use Audacity. There are tons of other options out there. It's just Audacity is free and is in and of itself professional grade. It's been around for a very long time. Newer versions are even more robust. And for video editing, again, lots of options. I used to use just plain old Windows Movie Maker before that got discontinued. Nowadays, I just use whatever I can. I don't post regularly anymore. I just do what I need to for my own projects. But I encourage you, if you're interested in learning about digital media of any kind, whether it be audio, video, images, 3D modeling. Oh, for 3D modeling, I forgot to mention editing software for that. The one that I see a lot of people using is Blender. So I just want to get all these, like name drop all these tools for you in case you're interested. I encourage you to check out some of these free options: Audacity, Blender. I'm honestly, it's been so long since I've looked for robust video editors. I don't know about free options anymore. And of course, paint.net for image editing. That's my preferred, but you may have a different preference.